Himesh, welcome to the podcast. So glad you're here today. Thanks for coming in. Yeah, tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do. Let's start there.
All right, my name is Himesh Patel. I grew up in Georgia, moved here to Oklahoma with my wife almost 9 years ago now.
Oh, wow. Okay.
We have a little girl, 3.5-year-old Zoe, who's shockingly intelligent, and it's very annoying that she's outsmarting me already. But it's
so sweet
but she's a sweetie though.
Yeah.
I grew up in kind of the entrepreneurial family, businesses between hotels and dry cleaners and a lot of restaurants over the years and that sort of thing. So I've been in and out of the restaurant and hotel business my whole life. That was kind of a big part of what I was part of. I currently own a Baskin-Robbins here in Oklahoma City, and my wife we own a Kumon Math and Reading Learning Center in Edmond.
Wow, okay.
So she was a teacher starting out of college, loved it, but as teaching tends to do, you get burnt out. So we explored some new avenues, and Kumon just was a great fit and something that she really believed in, and God really just lined things up for that. And so now we've got two businesses, which is terrifying.
There's days it's the best life in the world, and there's days it's
just like, oh no, what have we done?
Yeah, and that's I think that's the life of an entrepreneur for sure.
Yep.
But talk more about that. So we were kind of talking right before we turned the camera on about like our past. Our families kind of were into entrepreneurship. What did that look like for you, and did you learn a lot from them, and what do you feel like is like a missing element that you don't have maybe now that you wish you had? I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, I definitely grew up around it, so it gave me a lot of exposure to the amount of work it takes to do it, especially growing up. Like, we had restaurants, and if anyone that's ever owned a restaurant or been in the restaurant business, is that it's tough. It's a lot of work. Baskin-Robbins is probably the easiest form of the restaurant industry you could get, just ice cream shop in general. It just first before that, I had a tavern back in Georgia. It was a bar and grill, and that was tough. I owned it with my brother, which made it also very tough. Working with family can be very difficult, especially an older brother. But definitely learned a lot as far as just the amount of work it takes. I learned a lot of the overarching things that are required about working with employees and managing costs and that sort of thing over the years. But I never really was around for kind of the startup of those kind of businesses. A lot of what we did when I was older, when I was old enough to actually kind of understand business, actually have interest in it, we did a lot of buying businesses that were, especially restaurants that were having struggles.
Okay.
Buy them for a good deal and then turn things around through a lot of hard work and blood, sweat, and tears, and then eventually it's worth something more than you bought it for.
Yeah.
And that's kind of been our wheelhouse. We haven't really done a lot of. It's been a long time since we've done something from scratch. Yeah. But my parents have done that. They introduced, there's a brand called Great Wraps. They're not around as much, and I think there's one at Penn Square Mall.
Okay.
But they're Greek gyros, but he brought that to Georgia. Him and his brother opened a couple around. Also Del Taco, which is a big company, but he's the one that first brought it to Georgia as well, instead of malls. Okay. So they had mall restaurants, which is, restaurants in a mall back then, a whole lot different animal than they are now. Malls were busier then. But, they were able to provide a wonderful childhood for me and my brother, and even through the ups and downs of business ownership. So,
you've seen it, and you still wanted to do it.
Yep.
So that's
for some reason.
It's almost like it's inside of you a little bit. I think all of us have that, or not all of us, but many of us that want to start businesses. It's a certain mindset.
Yep.
And you've seen a lot of it right now. Like, there's a lot of people that are wanting that independence of entrepreneurship, bringing in their ideas. And I talk to a lot of young people, even earlier than their 20s that are already talking a lot about entrepreneurship.
Yeah.
And the internet has changed that obviously quite a bit too.
And it's great, but I think honestly a lot of people I've talked to that want to start their own businesses, and because even with my Baskin Robbins, I've got a lot of employees that are in high school or college, and over the years I've talked to a lot of them that are like, oh, owning your business sounds so easy. Like it's like, oh yeah, I mean, I watched a YouTube video about starting your own business and it looks so great. And I'm like, yeah, but I think a lot of people aren't also warning these kids about the difficulties that it takes, the money, and the processes too.
Yeah.
It's not rent a space, have a product, sell it. There's a lot of steps in between.
And that's kind of a little bit what we want to talk about today. This conversation started by you calling me, I guess, last week and just saying, hey, what was your experience with the SBA loan? And so we're going to talk a little bit about like funding and investment and some of those things. I mean, I would love to learn from you on that, and then I was going to share my experience with the SBA. Obviously, like you asked. One of the ways I wanted to set this up though, as far as because I think a lot of people have this question. It was honestly the thing I was telling my kids this morning. It was a thing that kept me from starting a business is that I was making an assumption about getting the capital to start. I thought, I don't have enough equity, I don't think it can happen. And there's literally apparatuses that our government has created that not everyone can get an SBA loan, but it's made for startups. It's made to get small businesses going, and it's really a beautiful thing. And there's some challenges to it, but there's, it's what it's made for, right?
It's the government at the end of the day, so you can't expect it to be smooth, but there's also ways it can be, it's very helpful.
And so, we're going to talk mostly about that today, but I wanted to kind of outline the different types of, I just learned this recently in an entrepreneurship group, is the different ways to get startup funding. And obviously friends and family is a big one. A lot of people just say, they're asking their uncle or their grandparents for that first initial boost to get started, that capital. It can be complicated, but obviously could be a good place to start for a lot of people. Angel investors, people that are going to get back the money slowly. Maybe it's a friend in that case, but it really has to do with your social network. Once again, people are looking for deals out there, though they're outside of banking institutions. VC, which is like that venture capitalist, these are usually high growth situations where they're wanting to invest in something that's going to take a pretty big growth pattern. And so they're looking for large investments at that point typically. And then the private equity is more so, those are pretty large scale projects as well typically. And they're usually in for a season and then are going to get out at some point. Once again, I don't claim to understand all this, but the framework helped me, so that's why I wanted to share it. And then banking, obviously, which most people have told me, like the advice that I got early on with Enjoy, is the bank money, if you can, the bank money is going to be the cheapest money, right? So if you can get the bank money and it works for both parties, that makes the most sense. Like start there, and that's kind of like your foundation. To go, okay, this is what it's going to cost to get this amount of money. And so I don't know if you have any thoughts in the outline or questions you might have on those things, but
definitely the banking is the standard way to go if that's at all possible, especially depending on the scale and what you want to do it. I know things like SBA have a limit, but it's also I think it's like a $5 million limit or something, how much you can, so it's high. But for some people, like I've got family members that like $5 million doesn't build a hotel. If that's what they're doing. Like
you need at least that.
So
now on that, so what paths? Maybe let's start with what paths have you taken in the past? Have you gotten bank money? Explain some of that stuff.
So for the Baskin, it was originally supposed to be an SBA loan. It was a nightmare just because the process took so long. Part of that was, I think, because the gentleman I bought it from, I think his banking, his information kind of contradicted a couple of things. So I think it was I feel like we still got a fair deal for it and paid what it was, what it was worth. Maybe a little bit over, to be honest, but there was just a lot of some discrepancies that the bank saw that was just kind of like, okay, well, let's make this, just prolong the situation. And then Bank First actually turned around and was just like, hey, we're going to give you a standard loan, and then because this is just taking too long. Because we started the process, I think we started the process in June, and we were trying to take over August or September or something like that, but it was November before he ever picked up. And like, it just ended up being just a lot longer process than it should have been. So that kind of like gave me a bad sense of SBA and all that.
And that was an acquisition, so that was a business that was running, and you bought it.
Buying a current
And I'm sure that's a
business.
little different process than a startup even too.
So,
I'm assuming they're looking at receipts and like accounts receivables and payables and everything like that from the previous business.
right. That's and that's my experience even with working for doing the Kumon, is that it was, hey, we need paperwork from the established business. It'll show that this place is capable. Like, we know what it's currently making.
Right.
So these businesses, it's like, okay, we have a foundation. We know we could take over tomorrow, and minus anything crazy, we're gonna have that income to start off with. And like with the Kumon, like, all right, well, we took over. We did the SBA process. It was a lot more easier to deal with, I think, but it was still difficult because it's, hey, we need this information. All right, well, I need to contact the seller, and then the seller contacts her banking, her CPA, and then it goes through this whole line of process to get anything done.
It takes time.
Yeah, so that's my experience with SBA is going that way.
Did you go through Bank First again on that
Yes.
one? Okay.
So so that was an easier process, but still took time. But also the Kumon to get approved and go through training is a long process anyway. So either way, it was going to take a while. So we weren't hindered by that.
And you were kind of teaching me a little bit about sometimes these franchises too. They're obviously approving the deal as well. Is that how Kumon was as well?
Yes.
Where they had to kind of prove the deal.
Yeah, they had to kind of verify that. Like, I think there are requirements for someone that wants to take over. They want owner operators. They don't want someone to just buy it and then put them, a manager type of situation there, because there's a lot of training that goes into it. There's a lot of you're dealing with education for kids, and this is it's an international company. It's a company that's, I think it's internationally. It's number 5 or number 4 in the largest franchises in the world.
Wow.
Like, which is shocking. Like with McDonald's and things like that. It's way up there, because it's just a very it's less so in the U.S., but internationally it's a big deal. It's based in Japan. It started in Japan. But there's a whole approval process. They want to make sure they're getting the right people in there. But Sonia had the background in education. She was a reading specialist in elementary schools, so she was kind of an ideal candidate. But the person we bought it from has background in banking. Like, so it was, she did a great job with it. And then Sonia we were able to take it over and kind of bring it to another level. That's cool. That's all her. She's incredible at that.
What a special person Sonia is. She has such a wonderful heart. One of the kindest people. I don't know. She just has a presence about her that is just very loving. Oh yeah, absolutely. As you know. She says, hey, that's how she got me. Okay, so that was kind of an acquisition situation, but you're kind of going into, and however much detail you want to get into, but you're going into more of a startup phase now on a project. We were talking on the phone. So maybe talk me through either questions you have or however you want to talk about the project. Right.
So it is a franchise. So there are, so thankfully there's kind of a breakdown of what it can kind of cost, what they kind of want you to have in capital and that sort of thing. But I've just never done it where it's not like, when we bought the basket, it was, okay, this is the price of the business. And we want to do renovations later, so we got a renovation. They gave us some extra for renovation. They also, helped us with our, first month's rent and paying for inventory and that kind of stuff. Like, okay, it's all things that are very easily, hey, this is what we need because this is what these things are going to cost. But looking into like, hey, we're going to start this business. Well, there's the initial franchise fees for it. Then there's the build out, and then there's the FF&E, which is they have their distributor, because they've got their company that they're using. All these things that are broken down, they even want you to have X number of dollars to kind of help with the first several months of your bills, and they put $12,000 to $15,000 for grand opening, like just 3 months before, just pushing for a lot of marketing, getting social media, and all that sort of thing. So I just didn't know what it looks like when there's a lot of things that are. There's not that for sure, like, hey, well, this is gonna make, you know, we know it's gonna make, we know it, but you know, it's estimated costs of things, and you know, do they just like, okay, well, you're approved, here's the money, and then just send us receipts on what you think it's actually gonna cost and all that stuff. I didn't know how much they're able to do, if it's just for build out, or you know, just for F&E. Like, I don't know, like how much you have to really come to the table with versus what they're going to give you. I know 20% is pretty standard, but I just don't know. Like, you know, build out can be pricey, and then all the extras that go with it.
Right. Yeah, those are great questions. I think it's questions that a lot of people have, and that kind of hold us back too sometimes from going for it. I think one of the things I was surprised at is, like, I basically took the document that I had been working on and estimates kind of, and just kind of took that to my banker and just started the conversation there, and they kind of looked through it, and honestly I think it made sense to them, both from like a you know, like a price point or whatnot, and so they were cool with that. I was surprised at how closely what we started with is kind of what we finished with as far as the loan. But I'm sure there's cases where they just kind of give you feedback if they think that's, you know, if they don't think that's reasonable or whatnot. But I think I would be interested from a franchise standpoint how that works when you bring, because it's almost like this is the package that the franchise recommends. If we're going to do it, it's going to look like this, and you're basically just saying, taking it to a bank, going, well, can we do this, right? And then of course, like obviously, like you said, the down payment. I think ours was like 10%.
Oh wow!
It's kind of, so that was nice as well.
Yeah.
And then you can even have that. You can technically, I think you can have it as a gift, but it has to be a gift. It can't be like a separate loan. Right. Obviously, which you I'm sure experienced too.
With the Kumon, we got some money from my parents, which they had to sign a piece of paper that said this money is it's a gift, and we don't you know, want that back. Because they've got to see, like, they look, you know, months into your past, saying like, well, where did this money just automatically appear from? Right. You know, they don't want you to get a loan for your down payment. Right. And they do dig into those account statements. I mean, you've basically got to kind of open up your whole financial history to them in a lot of ways. So that's something to be aware of too if you're going down this path for people. So as far as the SBA. So do you think, I mean, I've never done a franchise situation either, so what does that look like? Is it truly like they're saying there's these elements and you need to do all these elements in order to get this franchise? Is that kind of how it, or is it, how much of it is your, do you have flexibility to change some of those numbers, or is it kind of like this is what we need? The process is sign your franchise agreement, come with the franchise, the money for the franchise.
Franchise fee.
Which is, it varies a lot from company to company, but this one is steeper than I ever really thought of, but you're just talking to people in other similar size businesses, that it's not outrageous. But there's that process, and after that goes to, you know, picking a location. They kind of plan out how they give it to a company that will plan out how it's going to look, how it's going to be spread out, and then I find my own contractors, I get it built out, and then they literally they make the plan, they send it to a company that they have, they build everything, and once the building is done, they bring a container, they put it all up, and the store basically goes from bare walls to an almost completed facility in about a week. So
when you say contractor on your side, you're just basically getting the white box.
Yes.
And they're kind of doing
I think probably like they put where they want the lighting and all that stuff, but they bring the lighting and all that stuff too. So just pretty much just the wiring, plumbing, paint, color, that kind of stuff goes on the wall, and then they actually move in with chairs, furnishings, mirrors, decoration, everything else. I think a lot of points of being able to save money is there.
Yeah, okay.
Having, you know, being able to be how involved you want to be with it.
Yeah.
You know, if you're gonna have just somebody like, hey, here's the plans, go do it. I'll see you in a week, you know, in a couple weeks when it's done. Or if it's your level of involvement, you know, will lower those prices or, you know, raise those prices. Also, the location, if there is, how much work needs to be done for it.
Yeah.
If you're, you know, having to rebuild things or tear things down.
But a lot of that's up to you by choosing the space.
Yep.
Do they have recommendations on certain locations that would be better than others?
Yeah, they once you kind of really start pulling into getting into it, they've got companies that will run demographics and just average incomes, that sort of thing. To say, well, because I'm looking at Edmond, but Oklahoma City, I think there's certain areas that would be great for it as well. And you know, they may recommend, well, Oklahoma City seems like it's like, you know, Midtown may be a much better location versus Edmond, but they'll have those recommendations. And they even were, you know, Fort Wright saying that, like, if we don't think your area can sustain this business, because it is a higher end business, like they'll tell them no. They've told people multiple times that no, like, this town will not support this business because there's just not enough people, average income's not high enough. And I appreciate that. I appreciate them they're, you know, willing to have a location, not have a location versus a location that fails.
That's kind of it would be a bad on them, you know, because it's. Do they have? Do they get any kind of? I don't know how. I guess each one might be different, each franchise, but do they get a percentage then of sales over time? Okay.
Yeah.
So that's. But what a cool thing, because it's like it's kind of like a turnkey situation a little bit. Obviously, you're very involved, but it's like product-wise and like some of the aesthetics. It's kind of like could be good to go.
Yeah, and I think they do leave, and they do also leave room for personal touches too, to make it for where you're at. I mean, they don't want something in California to look like Oklahoma. The location I went to was in Virginia. And, but there's, you know, you're able to tweak things and make it a little bit more personal. There's an overall aesthetic, but it's a aesthetic that fits most places too. It's I think it'll work here, but it's kind of in the early process of it and a little terrifying.
It's always a risk.
There's always a risk, and
you got to step out of the boat.
Yeah.
But the financing is a big part of it. So I think it's like figuring that out. Somebody gave me advice recently, and they just said you got to have a relationship with bankers even before you need the money, right? There's got to be some kind of like start that conversation. So that's what I encourage people to do too. Is just like, hey, have that. Just talk to them, right? You don't know, and I think it's because I sat with like assuming I couldn't get the money for so long that I wish I would have just had the conversation and started it. Even if I wasn't ready to pull the trigger, it was just kind of like, hey, just start it. I don't know if you have anything to say to that.
Yeah, I mean, I think we both kind of took the same process of asking Brandon. Like, you know, we went to Brandon and was like, hey, like, what advice do you have with us? And he was honest about it. And, hey, this is kind of the processes. Here's some people that we know, but, you know, I can't help you out, but I know people who can. And having those people that will be just honest and, like, if, you know, I always hate always worried about the people that will tell you what they want, what you think you want to hear just to get some business, and knowing full right that it's not the right thing. You know, like, we'll figure it out, we'll do it. There's the BSers. They'll talk about it until, and then when it comes down to it, they're like, oh well, you know, it actually just doesn't work out for us. Like it's like, but I didn't come to like. You're supposed to help me out with this. Why did you say you could? And, we kind of had that situation with my tavern too. Like we just, we went with a bank. It was a Bank of America. It was a large bank, and talked to somebody at the branch. Oh yeah, we'll work together. We'll make sure this is a success. So like, yeah, well, this and this and that and that, and then when things weren't just money wasn't just rolling in, they're like, well, you overdrafted, but there was it's like there was no wiggle room in dealing with them.
Yeah.
There was like,
It
oh
wasn't
no,
a relationship.
you're 10 minutes late on this, so we're gonna charge you everything. Like
Yeah.
it's just there's zero
Flexibility there.
flexibility. And when businesses are great, then that's fine, but you don't have to if you're not dealing with the bank.
Right.
And
Right.
if you're not a big fish with the bank, sometimes you just don't feel like you're matter at all.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, we'll just charge them some fees, and then they're whatever. What are they gonna do? Leave?
Yeah. Yeah.
But having that connection with a smaller bank can be hugely helpful because, like, we switched to a local bank, and the bank was like, "Hey, you know what? This we see that you have a deposit coming in today, but like that comes in, tonight at midnight. Like that'll be fully processed, but we've got a check that's coming out today. Like, you want us to hold off on that check?" It's like, yeah, just process it tomorrow, and that'll be fine. Like, okay, perfect. Like, and just those personal connections just make such a big difference.
Oh yeah, they care. I mean, it feels like they care. So okay, no, that's great. I mean, that's great advice too. I think for people that are just kind of getting into it, the relationship is important. The thing, because our mutual friend Brandon, he was saying there's just certain banks that specialize in certain things. So I think be aware that honestly, I had no idea when I started this process. I just kind of thought a bank was a bank.
Yeah.
I knew there was local banks. I knew there was like national brands, but to think that there are certain banks, like Brandon, our friend, would have loved to help both of us in that situation, but his bank, it just wasn't their expertise.
Yeah,
and so he was honest with us and said, hey, go see these people.
You want an SBA loan? Like, that'd be best for you? These guys are, that's what they do. They have a whole department for SBA loans.
Exactly, yeah.
It's like, so if you do it through me, like, honestly, like, I don't know where to begin. Like, it's just not something we do, so it makes sense. I mean,
And I've heard too that with SBA specifically, you can get, if people don't know what they're doing, you can kind of get into a little bit of a mess too, because there's so much paperwork and accounting and like government feedback. Obviously, there's things that you have to continue to do, and if they're not set up to do that, you can definitely, it can come back to bite you. I don't know if I'm sure you've heard that too.
Oh yeah. Just like anything, if you don't do their paperwork right for the government things, best case scenario, they say, hey, fix it and we'll move it forward. Or they're like, okay, well, you're gonna have to start from the beginning because this was done wrong or something. So it's a slow moving beast at the government, but I mean, they're able to do so much more than just a bank can to the government.
Yep. Any other questions before we kind of shut it down, or any other like thoughts that you want to like bring up? I feel like it's helpful.
Yeah, like just what was your I guess level of like how much sorry, I don't know what I'm trying to say.
You're good.
Looking back at your SBA process and just from when you dreamt of this place to actually, I don't really want to know where did this concept come from? Where did you? I know you've kind of been in this industry for a while, and what kind of helped you to push you over the edge to like, you know what? I think I could do this myself, and I think I could do a great job and build a beautiful place, and that could be a business.
Yeah, that's a great question. Thanks for asking it. I think it was a slow process for me. Like you said, I've been in the industry now for 10 years. And so I'd seen lots of different businesses. I saw some groups. We actually helped acquire groups in Indianapolis, and so we'd bring practices together, optical shops and optometrists, and we helped package a bunch of them, about 50 locations all over Indianapolis. And then we ended up, the owners ended up selling it after I left, and did really well. And it was a great business model. And I was like, oh wow, that's really interesting. And I think there's something about optical that I really love, but then there's that business side that I think is super interesting. And now I have a vision for building these shops, having that relationship. I think a big part of it is for us, like being in the community. I walk to work, 30-minute walk, and so it's nice to just be part of our community. We've always enjoyed business, and then I just kind of at some point just decided to embrace optical, and I think that was the moment for me where I'm like, okay. One of my mentors, our friend Clint, he's like, Josh, you got to think about what's in your hand. What do you have? you know? And I think for so long I kind of like fought it, where I was like, wow, I'm not just the glasses guy. You know, I'm a coach, I've been a pastor, I have these other skills.
Yeah.
But at some point I just embrace it. Like, I'm the glasses guy, and that's okay. You know, I'm going to build these businesses, these locations, and then we're going to also be able to build teams, which is what I really love. But it's almost like this is the avenue for us to be with people and coach people and lead people and just be a part of the community. You know, so I think I finally wrapped my head around the big picture of this. This isn't just me selling glasses every day. It is that, and I love that. But it's also building a community. It's building a place like this where we can have a conversation about entrepreneurship because we're both in the same world. And so that's been really, really cool as well. But I just kind of had to wrap my head around it. And once I did, it's like, this is kind of a no-brainer, you know? And I actually loved both the place I described in Indianapolis. It was a great experience. I worked for an optical group here in town for 7 years, ran the shop there. I love that experience, learned a ton from them. So it wasn't like I was running from anything. I was actually just finally like embracing fully what really God had for me in faith. But it took a step of faith. You know, I had to take that risk of like, I don't know if this is going to work. I think this is going to work, and I believe it's going to. But there is that element of, you know, faith where you just have to say, okay, God, I'm going for it. You know,
I can fully see that. I understand that there's a sense of, well, I don't want to be pegged down as just one thing. I'm not just, you know, the glasses guy. I'm not just an ice cream. You know, the ice cream guy, like whatever, like, which, you know, sounds fantastic. I've got every 3-year-old's, you know, dream job, but, you know, but just because that's necessarily your, you know, your headline doesn't mean there's not a lot of jobs that go into it as well.
That's right.
Like, oh yeah, like I manage an ice cream shop, but you know, as like because my wife's the owner, like I'm a manager, but I also do all this and this. Like I have relationships with my staff. I have relationships with people that come in. You know, I'm a cake decorator. I do this and that. Like, there's a lot of things that go into it, and not, you know, knowing that just because you are one thing does not negate the other things that you are as well. And especially like when you have that, you know, wanting to expand, things like that, like there's a lot that can go into that. You got that leadership skills, you've got those communication skills that you're great at, networking, all strengths that you have that are coming useful for growing a business. And I mean, there's definitely aspects of that terrified me, because I'm not the big networker. Like,
right.
But I'm friends with people that network. So I was like, that's my in. Like,
it's called Brandon and Joshua.
Yeah, like, hey, who do you know that can do this? Like, I'm terrible at networking. My brother is an amazing networker. Okay. That man knows everybody. I think he knows more people in this state than I do. Like, he's just, oh yeah, do you know so-and-so? Like, I don't know. Like, I haven't been to that. I've never heard of that town before, and I live in the state.
I mean, that's a good point too. I don't know. Like, I think I'd like to hear you talk about that a little bit more. So, what do you see as your strength then? Because I know you have them, but I'm wondering if you have a sense of it.
I think I'm the worst person to try to figure out what my strengths are.
That question is terrifying.
I've always like thought about that. It's like whenever I like meet Jesus and he's like, you know what, I made you special. Like, this is what you are amazing at. Like,
you'll be waiting
I'm
there.
I'm gonna be like,
cool.
What is it like? What was that one thing that you said that like, all right, he's like he's gonna be okay at this and okay at that, okay at this, but he's gonna be great at this. Like, I don't know what that is. I can make my daughter laugh pretty well. Like I'm pretty solid at that. But
comedian, check.
My wife has definitely become immune to my jokes, but you know.
But I mean, you at least strike me from the outside as like a kind of a numbers guy. Like, you're good at the financial part, I'm assuming, some of that back end stuff. You also have a great personality, which you take, you know, you jokingly like set aside. But you are, I mean, you're a fun guy. You bring a lot of joy. But definitely on the financial side, I feel like you probably shine. Talk to me about that. Are you good at that?
I love a good spreadsheet.
See, like, that's not me. So I totally
love, like, especially I think that's one of the things I really like about. Anytime we bought a business or looked at a business, or even with Baskin and Kumon, it's like running the numbers on it, saying like, okay, well, this is their P&Ls, which terrifies me because all the P&Ls that we have for an upcoming business is all imaginary.
Right. Is that the scary part for you on the startup?
Absolutely.
Because there's no spreadsheets to look at.
Yeah, it's for the basket and for the Kumon, there's, look at a P&L, well, you know what? I got the manager salary that can come out of there. Like for last year's sales, if I can get, the food costs under control, well, I'm not paying a manager, I'll be working more shifts. So my payroll will go down. I can make these changes in order to make okay, according to last year's numbers, if we can keep our same sales, we can still make some money.
Yep.
And then after that gives me the peace of mind that, okay, as long as I do this at minimum, everything else is gravy.
Yeah.
Any growth, any expansion, that's all gravy. With Kumon as well, okay, these are numbers, I can make this work.
Yep.
And I can even run the numbers okay, well, this is our fixed costs, these are our variable costs. If at the end of the day, as long as we have X number of students, we can survive.
Yeah.
We can still take a salary and all that stuff. And at worst case scenario, even if we get this, at least the business pays for itself.
Yeah.
And then we can figure out what we need to do.
Yeah. So there's some unknown to this startup.
Yeah, when I had a meeting for the performer meeting, where it's well, we're gonna type in, this is pretty average for how many clients members you're gonna have. This is how many, this is what your average rate is. This is how many people that will usually walk in, and they tell us well, this is kind of. We'll go a little low on our expectations on the clients, and we'll go a little high on some of the costs.
Okay.
That way you can still see kind of where your a rough break even would be.
Yeah.
How many months it'll take before you start turning a profit.
Yeah.
Which is very helpful. Hey, you know what? It can show that in these bad circumstances that you can still make some money. May not be right away, but down the road. But it's terrifying because that's all theoretical.
Yeah,
it's all theoretical. Hey, you might. It's okay, we're doing big market push. Most stores have, a lot of them have 350 people signed up at day one.
Yeah.
But but we're gonna put 200 just in case.
Right.
What if it's not as good? I was but it could roll around and you have no one. Or you can have 100 people. You have 10 people, and all of them are my friends, and I gave them a discount. I'm well, I'm broke.
Yeah, there's some unknown there.
Yeah, that unknown. It's I can play with numbers to see well, if we can get this, then this will be. But trying to figure out where that low number is, it's tough.
Yeah, and maybe that's a new skill that God is developing in you too. I always think about from that standpoint, where it's this is your next level of growth, beyond the P&L, that's obviously an amazing skill. I don't have that skill, so I think that's for me, I see that as a big gift. But I think maybe in this next season, maybe it's more God's asking you to kind of step out and be I got you. If He is telling you to start it, then He's gonna prepare the way. And I think, well, at least I can share my experience. Those projections are truly that. And I think my banker helped me to understand that. Relax. We know this isn't going to be exactly how it plays out, but the industry, you have the experience. Write down what you think is possible within, be conservative, but be, just be honest about it.
Yeah.
And I thought that was helpful. And I think, and that once again, going back to the finding the right banker, to go write it down. We're going to help you, give you some feedback if we don't think it's going to work or if those numbers don't make sense. But it's almost you're just projecting. There's just so much of it where you're just this is what we're planning for, and there's that risk that it won't work. But I think from the franchise standpoint, it's got to give you a little bit more okay, this has worked in other places, similar markets, so maybe that's kind of lean back on that too.
Yeah, that definitely gives me a little bit more peace of mind that, okay, well, it's worked in the past for many people, and one of the next steps for me is to talk to people that have started this in similar markets. And, they're and be honest with them, hey, if what we're telling you is not right, they'll tell you.
Okay.
That's one thing I really appreciate about this franchise. They're we want you to talk to other franchisees because you will either verify what we're saying or say hey, this is actually, we did a lot better than this, or hey, we weren't. They'll be true, to be honest, because they don't have nothing to lose.
Right. They don't want to see you fail. I mean, yeah.
So I think there's and it's great to have that opportunity to have feedback, have people that are in similar boats to have a conversation with, especially because this is my first time in that industry. So
Well, and I think like even this conversation, we're going to be wrapping it up here in a minute, but just we're going to share some more details, like just personally, like on the businesses, some of the numbers and stuff. But I think it's just like we're entrepreneurs. I mean, you've done it for longer than me, but I feel like I'm just getting started. But I think it's just sharing the journey could maybe give courage and boldness to other people to go like, we're kind of all trying to figure it out. Yes, we have a certain skill set, we understand certain things, but then we need to surround ourselves with people that also understand maybe the things we don't. And then to borrow courage from each other. Like Himesh has taken this leap. I wonder if there's something that I could work on, a project that I should take a leap on. And so I think that's what we're doing. This is what we're doing with this conversation, just so everyone knows. So these aren't two experts. Sitting down talking about what they've figured out. It's more about like, hey, this is where we're at right now. We're trying to figure it out, but we're going to share our story.
We've learned so far, but there's still 1.5 million other things to learn, and no one knows it all.
But you appreciate people that are willing to like have that conversation. So thanks for sitting down and being honest about where you're at and this next stage of growth. I'm super excited to see what God does and continues to grow you guys.
Definitely praying that if this is the right path for us, doors will be wide open, and if it's not, they shut hard and fast.
And I think you and I agree. I have that faith in common where we're believing God for it, we're praying, but also faith sometimes just asks us to step out of the boat. And I think that's the part that I finally embraced, where I was like, hey, I can't see where this is going for sure, but I'm going to take that step. That's not always the right thing to do, but I think there are certain seasons where God just calls us a little bit further than we've been before. And I know we're in that season right now, and so it's cool to talk to someone else that is kind of in that season too.
Definitely. Appreciate
Thanks so much for coming.
Himesh.
It's fun.
Thanks for having me.